Hey guys, TC Mabe with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you a couple more videos to help you get started with Unreal Engine. This one's going to talk about from the ground up to create a new project and basically how to bring in characters and things like that and get started with some of your animations for those characters and a couple of basic fundamental concepts that you might run into when you're first getting started in here. So what I've done is I've gone into the launcher for Unreal Engine, which you can typically find, after you've installed it, you'll come in here. And if you go into the library section, you'll be able to launch whatever your current version is. I'm using 426 for this particular video. After you launch the engine, you'll come to a menu here where you can select or create a new project. And I typically select the game category here, new project categories. And underneath of this, you'll have several different templates that you can select from. Most commonly, I work in the third person template, which I will select here. And you can just click on the other ones to see a description of what they are. Once you go to the next button here, it asks you what type of project. And again, commonly we work in Blueprint, but you can switch this to C++ if you would like to. And you can also choose your quality, and these things can also be set later in the projects. Excuse me. You also select the location and a name. Now for mine, I had called this TPP underscore tutorial, and I've already created that project. So once you name yours, you would create a project and give it a second to get rolling. You can see here that my project was already created, and it basically comes in with some general things in here. Now, I am clicking my left and right mouse buttons on a lot of these things, and there are shortcut keys for a lot of the functions as well. But I use the mouse a lot when I'm doing the tutorial so you can actually see what it is that I'm clicking on. But for example, if you were trying to move this character to rotate him around, you could click on the character and he has these select and translate object tools. I'm just left clicking on there and you can see it's given me some coordinate movement here. I can change that around. And I can also click over here to select and rotate that character. And if we pan out, which I'll talk about in a second how to do this, but once you pan out, you can actually see how he's rotated around in the space here. And you can use these different tools to tilt and kind of pitch the character around. These are more commonly used for objects and things instead of an actual character. But for example, if I wanted to rotate that cube, I would just highlight that and do the same thing there. Now, what I was saying about the shortcut keys is you can see if you hover over it, this says select and translate as W, select and rotate as E, and then select and scale as R. So if I wanted to select and translate, I could hit my keyboard key W, there's the E key, and there's the R key. So, but like I said, I don't typically do this when I'm doing the training videos because I want you to be able to see that I'm clicking here or here, so that it's easier for you to follow along. You can move your mouse wheel in and out to zoom in and out of the area. And if you hold down your right mouse button and you rotate left or right, this will let you pan around. If you hold down the left mouse button, you can do the same thing, but you can also kind of move forward and backward a little bit better with the mouse button there. If you hold down the Alt key and right click on some objects, it'll make it easier to hold the position of things while you pan around. In this case, I'm holding down Alt and left mouse button to rotate that. The other thing is you also have access when you're right mouse clicking or left mouse clicking to use your WASD keys. So here I'm using right mouse button to pan, and I'm using WASD to zoom around. Now, if you find that the zoom speed is a little too fast for you, what you can do is while you're holding the right mouse button, you can roll your mouse wheel towards you, which I'm doing now, and that will slow down the speed. So you can see now I'm hitting W. You can't see that, but I'm pressing the W key, and I've rolled my mouse wheel back, and now I'm hitting the S key, and I'm moving away, and you can see I'm much slower. If I start rolling the mouse wheel while I'm moving, it'll increase the speed, and I can roll it back again by using the mouse wheel. This is particularly handy if you want to zoom out to a very far distance on something. So like say for example, holding my right mouse button, I look down at the ground and I start to use my S key to move backwards. If I roll my mouse button forward, I can zoom out very quickly. And again, come back in a little bit faster with having that mouse wheel out. But if I want to slow it down, I can roll the mouse wheel in. And these controls also become a little bit more helpful for when you're using cameras and things and doing some cinematics and things that we'll talk about maybe in a future video, or you can just look the topic up. But in a cinematic view, you would do the same type of thing with a camera and record your gameplay as you're doing it. So let's talk a little bit about what's up in here in the panels. You have an option to save your current scene or your work. Source controls for if you're wanting to keep multiple copies of the project. And typically this happens if you're working with several people and you're working on a project where you have code sources and things like that. Your modes panel you'll use when you get into landscape editing. And by default, you're typically not going to touch this, but this is so if you are creating landscape or brush editing, mesh painting, foliage, that's all under here. Also, there's a content panel which pulls up what's in this little content browser down here at the bottom. If you happen to have that closed or whatever, you can always bring it back up just by hitting content. Marketplace, of course, launches the marketplace. Under your settings, you find the options for world settings, project settings, and plugins. Those are the commonly used sections from this. World settings will put the menu for world settings over here. So if you go to settings, world settings, that'll show up here now. And we use world settings to set things like game modes and default classes and things like that for a particular scene. Again, we can talk about these things a little bit later, but it's just that's where that'll be. These are things that kind of like drive the behavior of what we're doing in this particular window. We also have other plugins, like in this case, I have Megascan. Sometimes plugins will show up in here. You won't have this by default. Um, we also have a list of world blueprints we can pull up, and we get open blueprint classes from here if we want to. Or we can open a level blueprint, which will be talked about again in a future episode. Cinematics menu gives you the ability to build some of the things that can be used for automatic movie making things. Not automatic movie making, but things that will play automatically when you enter a scene. You also have your build drop downs. Sometimes you'll see a thing here that says lighting needs to be rebuilt, and you can come down here to build for lighting. This also allows you to build your copies. You can go down here to build and submit if you wanted to bake this out to an actual game. And several other little things underneath of here. Sometimes building these take quite a bit. Most typically, you will find yourself hitting the play button in here, and you can change the settings for your modes and your play buttons by hitting this drop down. I typically work in the selected viewport window. These are called viewports. And I can also, if you go to standalone game, what this will do is it'll create a new instance and spawn that so you can kind of see the performance of your game. Some things in selected viewport run differently than they do if you put them in standalone game mode. Sometimes your frames per second count will be a little wobbly in the selected viewport, but if you take it out to its own game, those seem to respond a little bit better because they're in their own instance. And again, there's other things in here. Now, if you wanted to do a server test, you could do that right here. You can specify the number of players. So like, for example, if I say 2, and then I come down here and say play as the listen server or play as the client, I can be either one of those guys. If I hit the play button, you'll see that I launched a second character in here. And if I look over, there's my other character. So I can actually, WASD through here. You can see I just showed up on the other screen there. So right off the bat, this thing has some networking capability built into it for certain things. Others have to be what is called replicated in order to communicate information to other players that are on a server. Those are advanced topics which we'll get into down the road, hopefully. And the other thing we want to talk about real quick, I'm hitting the escape key there to stop that. But if I'm in play mode, again, I'm going to hit play and I'm 2 characters here. If I'm in play mode, I can work over in this window. But if I want to get out of that window, see my mouse is bound and I can't get out of it. But if you hold down the shift key and hit F1, your mouse will come back to your control and then you can go over and select the other window and interact with that window and then become that character. And again, shift F1 brings your mouse back. Now when you do that, you're going to obviously lose the window that's in the background. So a lot of times what I'll do if I'm running in this type of mode is I will get both of these windows in their own space where I can see exactly what is going on in each play space there. So I would kind of zoom these out a little bit or blow them up some, and then I could go in here and toggle back and forth to make it a little bit easier to actually see what I'm doing in a 2-player setting. So again, Shift F1 to get my mouse back. I would come over here and then move this character around, do something. Shift F1, come back over here and click, and so on and so forth. If we want to see the frame play count for a scene, I'm going to put this back on 1 real quick and play as standalone. If I want to see the frame rate for a scene to kind of understand how my resources are being used, there are little drop down panels in here. So you can drop this down and say show frames per second. This will start to show you the frames. Typically, when you're running a game, you want these frames to be at least 60, 50 to 60 minimum, and a little bit higher. And if you're doing something for like VR, frame rate is really, really super important, because if the VR frame rate drops too low, you'll cause motion blur sickness and things like that for the people who are playing your games. That's a whole different topic, but I just want to give you an idea of where some of these things are. We hit escape here again to get back out. If I go to perspective, what this will do is change how I'm looking at this capsule. This is a capsule that you can see around the player. This is your player. And if I go over here and I hit, like, for example, I want to go to the front, that's going to give me the front view of that scene. Okay, so I can zoom in on that and kind of see what's going on in that whole scene area. And if I go back to top, that's going to be the top down of that. So, you know, some people like to work in these types of ways. For me personally, I typically just work within the scene, but there are certainly instances where this would be useful for some things. Then you have the front and the back view, which are, you know, self-explanatory. I'm going to go back into perspective view, which is, again, the default that I typically work in. And then your lit section in here also gives you a bunch of different advantages, different options for hiding lighting or changing the lighting preferences. And one of the things you'll see in here down the road when we get into this a little bit more is there's going to be some times where you get a scene that you bring in from somebody else's work, and there will be some things in there that make the scene way too bright for you to be able to comfortably view it. And there's a section in here called eye adaptation, which I don't think they have in 426 anymore. It used to be called eye adaptation, but now it's probably called brightness or something like that. But it's basically to simulate how your light hits your eye and how your eyes slowly take something that's dark and turn it brighter. But when we get the need for that, I'll bring that up. So the other thing we have in here is we have these different windows. So over on the left-hand side, you have your place actors. So, you know, if you just wanted to bring something like a sphere out here, you could do that. Again, you have your tools to move this around. If I wanted to go and rotate that, which, you know, rotating a ball is not going to show you anything, but if I rotated that there, I could do it that way. The other thing I can do with this is I can go to select and scale, and you have these little pull outs that you can do that will change the dimensions of whatever coordinate you're pulling out. So now I'm going to hold down the right mouse button, and I'm going to hit the A key to fly over this way. And you can see that I've made this into kind of a, you know, an oblong shape there. And I can pull out other directions by just hovering over top of this marker. You see how it goes and gets colored like that. So these are pretty handy for when you're sizing objects and things, or bringing new objects out. If you want to bring out a cylinder or a cube, you can just drag it out right here. And again, you can size it by pulling on any of those particular things. You would use these to, like, maybe build walls or to block out a level. And what else do we have? Different types of basic shapes in there. You can also pull out lighting, kind of like this is a light. Anything that I click over here in the scene, I can also see over here in the world outliner. If I go to the cinematics, it gives me options for different types of cameras to bring in. Visual effects, I can bring those in here as well. But this is, I'm just showing you where this is at. We can talk about these in more advanced detail later. Even geometry, if you want to bring out curved stairs, they already have like a predefined step set for you. I'm going to rotate this around so we can kind of see a little bit of the front of it. Oh, we click off of it first. And we go zoom over here. I'm, again, right clicking and moving over. So we can see over here I've got this set of stairs already built. So if I go hit play, just like that, I've already got steps that I could put onto, you know, up to a building or whatever, and you don't have to make those. Now you can specify stair count and things like that by looking at the options in these other windows, which I'll show you in a second. But I'm just showing you that there are some pre-built geometry things here for you already, and you could use these tools to size and stretch some of these things out or whatever. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. In the volume section, There's a lot of stuff in here that I'm not really that familiar with. I don't typically use volumes, but you will use them for certain things. The one probably that you'll use the most often is Nav Mesh Bounds Volume, which is a navigational mesh that is inside of a shape. If you pull this out, this is a Nav Mesh Bounds Volume shape. And what it does is, if you hit the P key when this is built, it'll show you areas. So if I pick this up too far, that green goes away. When I hit P, it shows or hides the nav mesh. But basically what this is it's an area where it calculates the space that an AI character or an artificial intelligence character can travel within your area or your level without um, interrupting, their ability to walk. And you can specify different settings with these as well. Now, what I'm going to do, for example, if I scale this out, you'll see it goes and it rebuilds that. You see how it went red? I'm going to zoom out. I'm holding my right mouse button and the S key to zoom back. And if I pull this out a little bit more, you'll see it's red and then it goes green and it builds. And we'll see here, it only has a little sliver of green up here. And then it's got a spot where it ends. So an AI character would actually realize that there's a wall here. They wouldn't try and walk through that wall. What they would do is they would walk to that wall, and if you said, find a random destination in the map level, they would not try and walk on any of this grayed out area. They would only try and walk within this particular area that you've specified by the AI navigation. You can see how if I start spreading that out even further, the interesting thing is that you don't have any more nav mesh up here, but you do have some here and not there. And why is that? Well, as I zoom down here, what we can see is that little orangish yellow border or yellow orangish border that runs around falls below the plane line of that height. So I'm telling the nav mesh in here that it can't navigate at that height. Now, for example, if I didn't want AI to be able to spawn or walk up here, I could go down and drop this down a little bit further. Just pull it up a little bit. And I could actually kind of figure out where along the line that AI can't draw on top of that square. To drag it down a little bit more. So there you go. This would keep them from really ever being on the top of this platform. So certain IA, you may want to do that too. But if you wanted them to be able to walk on there, you can't pull this up because you still have to keep some on the ground, right? So what you would do is you would lower it down until it's touching the ground and creating a ground plane. Then you would go in here and you would pull the top up so that it's able to now draw your nav mesh, across that surface area. So just a little bit about how those things work. And this, as I said, we'll get into that type of discussion probably a lot more as we get into some of the additional things that are in here. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is we've talked a little bit there about how to find some of those types of things. Over here in the world outliner, this is a reference to all the stuff and all the different things that are called actors, which are within your level. And an actor is basically anything that is in your world that you can, interact with. So let me go back here and get this nav mesh bounds volume. Where did it go? I'm on the floor right now. So here's a good example. This is an easy way to locate stuff. So if I'm looking for that nav mesh bounds volume, it's here. Or I could go into the search box and just type in nav, and it'll show me where that is. Now, if I highlight that, I have the nav mesh selected, and I'm just going to hit delete and get rid of that. And I can also delete the recast, which we'll talk about later again. I don't want to get into too much detail in here because it's kind of a 30,000 foot view of, getting your way around. Again, for brand new users, I want to bring them up to speed as quick as possible, and then we'll get into some more advanced topics. A lot of my videos, if you watch other things, I did a broad range stroke of different topics, and it's kind of all over the place. I kind of want to give you a little bit more detailed information this time around and get a little bit more from the ground up to maybe help you get started. So again, over here, this is every actor that's in your world. And if you highlight it there, you'll see it here showing up. And you can also hide it from the view if you want to. So if you want to focus in on some things, you always go in here and kind of, take these out of the way and focus on other stuff. If you click it there, it'll show up here. If you click it over here, it'll highlight over there. And if you want to find where this thing came from in the world, like how did I even make that? If you right click, you can say browse to asset, and it'll take you over to whatever the location is. Now in this case, that is in the content third person meshes folder. And the reason that that's there is because when we started our level, when we started our game, there was an option there that said with starter content, and it was a third person with starter content. So this is some of the stuff that goes with the third person. They needed this mesh to show the third person level. So it gets included. The starter content has additional things. I don't want to skip too far ahead over here. But again, and there's other things you can do in here too. You can right click in here and go down to edit. You can duplicate things. You can delete them, rename them. If I hit duplicate, you saw just briefly that it created another one of those. I can drag that off to the side. So if you have a thing where you're building multiple instances of something, you could either come down here and right click and go down to edit and go duplicate, or you can see there's a shortcut for Control plus W. So if I have an object highlighted and I hit Control W, it's going to give me another one. Control W is going to give me another one every time I do that. So if I'm laying something out and I've got the same object multiple times, that's a real easy way to do that. Anything you hover over or look at in a menu, if it has a shortcut key, you'll see it here with the Control key or a Shift key or something like that, or a Control plus Shift or Control Alt. So keep your eyes out for those because, again, like these W and E and R keys are shortcuts there. Surely there are other ones in here as well that you might find beneficial. Also, another quick way to duplicate something is if you just, while you have it highlighted, you can just hold down the Alt key and drag another copy of it off of there. So I'm just holding the Alt key down on my keyboard, and then I'm left clicking on the translation tool and just dragging off of the copy there. So that lets you do it as you select it instead of a Control W, which does all at once. The other thing that's a good tip is when you're doing these things and you're trying to like lay a level out, you always want to bring one of your characters out and kind of put him there so you can see things as far as the size and scale of objects related to the character. For example, your character can't get through here if this was going to represent some type of corridor, whereas he can get through here. But look at how tight that corridor is. It'd be a little hard, and your camera gets all whacked out. I mean, you can certainly do it, but it doesn't lend itself very nicely to working with a character there. So what you would do probably is you could reference this and say, okay, well, my character's shoulders are about that wide, so I'm going to put this, over far enough that my character should be able to get through there and space things around and stuff like that, and kind of come up with some ideas of at least what the scene looks like for your character by having that as a reference object. It's also good for height. If you want to build a door, kind of stand your character next to it and go, okay, I can kind of visualize where a door should be, and then you can build it accordingly. There's some really great tutorials out there for that type of stuff. There's a guy who has a channel named World of Level Design, and he talks about all that kind of stuff way better than I'm ever going to talk about it. So you should go check his channel out if you're looking at doing level layout and design. Let's talk about the third person character. If you hover or click on that, it'll kind of show you where the guy is in the world. And also anything over here that's got a little edit button on it, you can go and edit here. But we'll talk about those things in a minute as well. Details panel, if I highlight that, anything I have clicked over here, you'll see it changes the details about it. And a lot of times in here, what you'll use this to set materials and textures and things like that. You may also use it to scale and move things by just punching in manual numbers. Like instead of dragging out with the tool, I can set it in here. Excuse me. I can set it in here just by hitting the button or typing in the number. And the other thing we can do here, if we talk real quick about materials, if I wanted to give this some type of a texture, I could go in here to the material section. It's going to pop up things that would go along with that. So by putting just something that simple, just grabbing a quick material, you see what it did is it put, that's a pretty big texture, but it put that texture on this object. It's nice looking, but it's stretched out a little bit. And different types of objects that you put material and textures on receive those materials and textures a slightly different way. But a real quick way to get a level up and running, and doing that type of stuff would be to grab this. Now, if you've applied something over here, and you want to undo it, there's a little reset to default button right here. You can also click it and go up to clear, which will take that away. And if you've found something that you like, here's a quick tip for you. Let's say I highlight this and I say, okay, I want to go in here and put in, we'll do this wood walnut. If I like that walnut look and I want to use that on all these things, there's a little magnifying glass here that says browse to M Wood Walnut and Content Browser. So if I hit that, it's going to take me to this thing. And then the arrow next to it says use selected asset from Content Browser. Well, if you navigated to the one that you just picked out of there that you liked, and now you've navigated to it with that tool, any of the other things that you click on out here, you can just click that little button and it'll bring that wood texture or whatever it is onto that. So I use X quite a bit when I'm building levels. I'll go and I'll find something that I like, and then I'll just go and say, okay, grab that and apply it. Find it, and then just apply it to the next thing. You'll see this later on in the thing when we start talking a little bit more about something called blueprints. Okay. Now, we've made changes to our scene. This is called a scene. So we would hit save current scene if we wanted to preserve those changes. And then also, let's just talk a little bit about over here in this navigation. What you'll see if you go over here, by default, you see all the different folders that are here for your content. And if you right click on these, you can go in here and have a lot of different options as well. You can create new folders within a folder, or you can right click out here and do a new folder within, again, this is a content folder, so it's still folder and folder. You can also show that in a new content browser, so it would take this and pull it up. We'll just do it right here. It pulls it up into its own little content window to show you what's underneath the third person. And you can also set the color in here, which some people find this very useful. You go in here and create colors to color code your work. So you know, for example, all of the stuff that has to do with geometry might be in a folder over here, and maybe you pick green or something. I don't know, but you can go over here, new color, and then just set whatever your color is. Hit OK, and that color now will be available. If you want to set color, you can use these existing colors. So if you said these are all random, set the color here. That's how you set colors on those. It might be beneficial for you again for your work. Save your content. You'll want to do this pretty frequently. There is an auto save that happens, but I typically find that if I am working a lot, I just want to save content to make sure I'm not breaking or that something doesn't break and I don't have it saved and my machine crashes or whatever and I lose hours worth of work. Your auto save will cover most of that for you, but sometimes you shut it off because it gets in your way of other stuff you're doing. So let's see, what else do we have in here? In this particular project, we brought in a mannequin as part of our third-person character. And this third-person character, we can see all that stuff down here. So the mannequin, if I expand this out, I normally work by expanding these windows here. I normally pull this out this way and expand all my folders down here because I'm a Windows user and this makes sense to me to look at folder and hierarchy structures here and then see what the contents are. Excuse me. So we talked a little bit about the geometry earlier. It's got a thing in it called a mesh. These are meshes. Your character is a mesh. You can have a skeletal mesh and a static mesh, which you can look the definitions up for those. But inside of here, your characters have materials and meshes as well. Materials are going to give you colors and texture, not textures, but colors and patterns and things like that. Your mesh is the actual the actual shape or object. Sorry, a little coughed over here. Excuse me. And those are the shapes of your characters. If you double left click on any of these, it'll pull them up into another panel to give you a little bit more detail and to be able to work with them in that environment. Again, all your zoom in and out and WASD keys all work within these panels as well. And this particular thing we pulled up was the mannequin. And he has asset details where you can change his shapes and his colors, or not his shapes, but you can change his colors and materials here. And you can also look at his skeleton tree, which shows you all the different bones and joints and hierarchy that make that character up. So you can, I've just left clicked on the first one, and now I'm using the down arrow on my keyboard to cycle through all the different bones that are on there. when you have a hold of these bones, you can go and create different poses and positions out of them. So, for example, if I went over there and said, let me grab my upper arm here, or my clavicle, that's in the shoulder blade itself, and I'm rotating that, but I could go down here to the upper arm, which is more of like at the joint of the shoulder. So you could actually go in here and you can pose these characters in different frames and in your animation tools. And using animation tools, you can store these as keyframe objects, which you'll find out more about that when we get into animation. But you can set a pose for a character and use that as part of your animation process to give that character a pose, or to animate it, or to make it look like it's doing a certain thing. You know, whatever that is. And that's just basically how you get into that. And from there, if you wanted to create a asset, you could turn that and say create a pose asset from the current pose, or other things in here. And I'll be back through all these menus as we go into other stuff. But again, I'm just kind of showing you 30,000 foot view, where things are located, how to get to them, double clicking, stuff like that. And hopefully this video is helpful for somebody who's just getting started. In your starter content folder, you have some architecture in here as well. Again, if you wanted to do like doors and walls, boom, you just pull one right out and there's already a doorway. You'll see that that doorway is, as I mentioned earlier, it's already sized up for your character. So it makes sense. It's already cut out. You could build rooms and stuff like that pretty quick. And then, by using your textures and materials, you could highlight that, and you go in here to your element and you just go, let's say, click on this, type in wall. Oh, there's no wall in there. Let's see, do we have stone? Sometimes you'll find stuff in here. Stone. There's brick cut stone I can put on there, and just that quick, I've got a texture, or material rather, on that wall. I keep saying texture, but I mean to say material. Um, Again, I'll type in stone, and we'll see what other stone we have. So here's hewn stone, and you've got, what other kind of stone? Cobblestone and sandstone. It's more for like a sidewalk, or a walkway, I would think. But you might also find the word rock in here, But some of these aren't going to look right on a doorway. You want more of like a wall surface. Maybe brick. No brick. Oh, it's a static mesh shows in. So let's go back here. Maybe a brick surface. And there's some beveled brick for you. Okay. Well, again, we'll get into this now. To zoom in and out of that full window, I'm hitting the F11 key. And then the other thing that's fun is if you're in F11, so out here I have my play window. When I go into F11, I don't have my play window anymore. So I can hold down Alt and hit the P key, and that'll take me into play mode. And then again, Shift F1 gives me my mouse back. I can click again to get my mouse back in there. And I can also, while I'm inside of this menu, if I just hit escape, it'll stop the game. Then I can F11 to zoom back out. So those are just a couple of basic tips and tricks. If you want to pull out anything else in here, you got audio that they've kind of predefined. You have things that are called waves and things that are called cues. The wave is the file itself. The cue is the thing that plays it and defines the how loud it is, and how many times it repeats, and all that kind of stuff. If you double left click on one of these, you can also see that it'll play. You can put a random in here. So like on this one here, it's playing one of the two different things. So every time I hit play, you see it just goes back and forth between these randomly. But it's going to probably mostly be just back and forth, If you wanted to have more randomization, you click more inputs to it and wire things up into there. Or you don't. So in this case here, now it's randomly not playing. Right? It's playing one of the two, and sometimes nothing. So we'll get into all that kind of stuff also. But what I would recommend from here, now that you have a little bit of an understanding of what's going on, I would recommend starting a third-person project and drag a couple of the assets out into the world and put some textures on them, or materials rather. try and build a couple of little wall items and zoom around the thing and get comfortable with how this moves. And then what we'll do is in the next video, we'll talk about bringing a character in and using that character to replace this character. And we'll talk about a couple of ways to do that. Okay? Again, my name is TC Mabe with TC Gaming. Hopefully this video is helpful for the brand new beginner or even somebody who's maybe been around for a little bit and they haven't looked at some of the other options that are in there. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit my Discord and check me out and let me know that you have questions and I'll try and help you. Again, my name is TC Mabe. Thanks for watching and Happy New Year to everybody. Bye.